Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cybersecurity Recruiter podcast. Today I'm joined by Jim Miller. How you doing, my friend?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Nice to see you. I think we've had this one in the making for a little while. I think we were initially chatting. Was it at the start of this year? I think it was the start of this year.
I think it was last year, maybe. You know how time flies.
Yeah, we got there in the end. I think I had to set up a 3-way chat on LinkedIn with me, you, and my ops manager to pin you down. But the plan worked and we got you, mate. So it's nice to have you, buddy. Cool. Yeah, Jim, I'm just going to do you a bit of an intro. If I get any of this wrong, feel free to shout at me, my friend, or correct me after. But started off in recruitment back in the early 2000s at Allegis Group. There, for those that don't know, is a huge recruitment company, and you were already at a management level back then. You then spent a decade at Google, progressed really nicely there, held multiple positions, got promoted multiple times, and went right the way up to global head of inbound talent. You're also the VP of talent acquisition at FullStory. You are currently holding multiple positions. So you're an executive member of Hire Community. You're also an advisor at People Tech Talent. And you are currently the VP of People and Talent at Ashby. Welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you. Yeah, 25 years doing this kind of stuff. Not the podcast, but in the TA.
You've held some good positions there. It'd be nice to dive into your career journey, Jim, and find out how you got into those spots and how you progressed well into them. It'd be nice to get your insights into the market. I feel like these days with layoffs and AI and some companies doing phenomenal, some companies doing terrible, I feel like that kind of market chat is always really valuable for everyone these days. So it'd be nice to dive into that. But I'll start where I always start, which is who are you, mate? What do you get up to? What's a day in the life like for Jim these days?
So I'm British originally. I'm from Suffolk, an Ipswich Town fan for my sins. But I live in the northeast Georgia mountains in the middle of nowhere, up in the border of the Georgia and the Carolinas and Tennessee, banjo country. And so life is very different to what it was in the UK. I've been in the US for 10 years. I moved over with one of my global roles for Google into the Bay Area and then into Austin, Texas, and then eventually to this part of the world to be close to my wife's family to help with the kids and so on. So that side of things, day to day, fully remote company. We've got people in 27 countries, but there's only 250 of us in the company, which is a very interesting and new way of working. For me and for most people, we're asynchronously remote. So the document is everything rather than the meeting. There's no FaceTime because there's no faces to see because people are all over the world in different time zones doing their work. So it's a fast place. Lots of white space to get your job done and relatively flexible working as well. I'm an early bird, so I tend to start very early and then finish earlier and have the evenings with the kids. And I coach football, even though I never played locally. And one of my daughters plays in the county academy. I enjoy that as well.
I think I saw that you'd done a meetup with your team. I think I saw a really pretty cool picture on LinkedIn not too long ago.
Yeah, we took everyone to Mexico 2 weeks ago. So we only got back a week ago Friday. And yeah, we don't have offices. We have one tiny little office in San Francisco. So we don't have those overheads. So we get everybody in the company together for 1 week a year, all inclusive, fantastic resorts, and very little of everyone sitting in the same room looking at someone speaking. Instead, a lot of cross-functional, getting to know each other. The big test is, should this be done face-to-face or can we do it over video? If we can do it over video, don't do it when you're in person.
Okay.
Random dinners. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's nice. I think when you are fully remote, it sounds like you're really intentional about being fully remote. And that's where I've seen it work really well. I think when companies aren't too sure, or the worst case is when they change their mind and get everyone back on site and then change their mind again. But if you're intentional about it and you do your meetups and you're intentional, I think it can work pretty well.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, cool, mate. Jim, before we dive into the market stuff, any insights? So that you've landed roles at mega companies where you are now, see Ashby, Google, you've landed some good positions, but not only that, you've either progressed really nicely like you did at Google or you've come in at VP level. Is there anything now you wish you knew maybe 5-10 years ago that has enabled you to progress that? If I'm listening and I'm in an IC position, but I'd like to get up to director or VP level, any tips for me?
Yeah, the big thing that changed my life was my early years at Google as an IC, and I was the first IC technical recruiter for Google London. So there were no engineers when I joined. There was just a site director. There was one engineer on training in Mountain View. Yeah. So I helped my boss at the time, Ian Sharp, to build that office out for engineering. And then obviously we grew the TA team off the back of that. I added value through. I started off as a temp there. and worked my way from the temp ranks, learning all the systems and learning all the processes. And then I became like the onboarding buddy trainer for everybody joining. And then I naturally started teaching people some of the sourcing skills that I'd built up during my agency days. And I'd become well known there. I was actually the European training manager for Allegis at the end of my time there, as well as a couple of other jobs. And I've talked about this on a couple of different podcasts and things, but teaching people and helping people approach the problem of pipeline, even for a company like Google, got me the tap on the shoulder to be a leader of a pilot team for the first time they wanted sourcing to be done outside the US. And I was already known as the sourcing expert. Here's 3 headcount, go build a team, see if it works in EMEA. It did. And then I ended up with EMEA and APAC, and then everything grew from that point. So just sharing your knowledge, sharing your Lego, it really stood me in good stead. The other lesson I learned was that you've got to put your hand up if you really want something. When it was 2010, something like that, maybe 2011, there'd been a vacancy that, in fact, I'd been filling with another colleague for about a year. And there was a big meeting and there was going to be an announcement. And I thought it was going to be me. And then they announced someone was coming over from America. And I realized that I'd never actually said, I want this. I was assuming if I did a good job, they would give it to me. And they didn't. So when I identified another opportunity that I really wanted, which was the head of online, Inbound, the last job I did for 6 years at Google, I actually pitched myself for that job before it even existed. And I got that role. And then I continued with my job at Ashby. Again, I pitched myself to the CEO for a job that didn't exist. And thankfully, he said, we hoped you'd ask. And 2.5 years later.
Ah, good. Yeah. So you learned the second time round, and you nailed it the second time round and the third by the sounds of it. Cool. So, yeah, I tell you what, I bet Google was a hell of a learning experience. To come in there as a temp, there was no engineers. I bet it was great for them having you there, but I bet it was great for your growth as well.
It was. The biggest value I got from it was the data. A lot of what I talk about now are from the massive data sets that I got from back then. We got 4 million applications a year running through my team when I led the Inbound group, and from 1.2 million humans. So every change you do has a magnitude of impact. And you end up with, I had this guy, he's phenomenal. Chris Patton, shout out to you. He runs all the surveys internally for Facebook now, for Meta.
Okay.
Back then, he was a PhD, like graduate researcher, analyst on my team, in my org, like incredibly smart guy. And he did this analysis and found out that the optimal number of characters in a job title to increase gender diversity was 19. If you had more than 19 in your job title, you had reduction in gender diversity in the applicant job. Little tiny things, factoids like this that are still stuck in my mind years later. Really smart people and massive data sets to do analysis on.
Yeah. Cool. Nice. Yeah. So in terms of progressing, Jim, put you afraid to put your hand up. Don't be afraid to ask. Is that there must be more to it than that, though, mate. You've landed these VP roles and done well. I imagine there's a bit more secret sauce.
The overall thing is do the right thing. And to me, when in recruiting, the right thing is quality over quantity. The hiring bar isn't going to drop because of the weight of the number of candidates you throw on top of it. Yeah. Don't throw them over the wall. Focus on getting calibrated on exactly what's required. Build on that. Make sure you double check to make sure nothing has changed. And just continuously focus on the accuracy and quality of the work that you do. Time is our one finite resource in recruiting. So then diving into the process and optimizing everything you can there as well. So it's not rocket science. It's just a very strong focus on doing the very best in every element you can to save time and to focus on delivery of the highest quality. And that gets recognized and that stands out.
I think that you can relate that to recruiters if they're just throwing stuff over the wall to their clients. If they're working agency side, I can relate it to job seekers. If they're getting frustrated and they're just applying for stuff willy-nilly. And it's like, in the world we live in, what you just said there needs to be said because it's all too easy. If you're not thinking about it, it's so easy just to throw mud at the wall. You actually have to deliberately slow down to speed up and do exactly what you said. So it's worth reminding people because you see that a lot. On the job market especially, you see that a lot. People just applying just willy-nilly.
It's treating everything as if it was your own business. That's the way I look at it. And I was taught that in the early days of agency, that in effect you are running your own business. And I know you do, so I'm talking about somebody who understands this, but anywhere out there, even applying for jobs, if you're on the job market, and I was there 2.5 years ago, it's a full-time job to do that work now. Again, thousands of other applicants who are all hyper qualified, let alone the fraudulent applicants and the spam applicants and everything else that's creating all of the noise. One of the things I find really interesting in the current talent market is, on one side, you've got the creation of intentional friction, where companies are using application forms and application questions to create friction to block folks who are not really interested in the job. Or if they're really smart, to create this intentional friction to make sure people see their own alignment to the job. And if they're not aligned, then they deflect themselves away from the application. And then you get the folks who look at those application questions and go, this doesn't apply to me. I'm special. So they'll just put NA or no. The people that put the effort in, and you see it, and they're not using AI. They are actually selecting the job because it's the best fit job for them. They see that they are fully qualified for that role, and they are applying intentionally for that job. Those are the folks that are getting hired. And people come back, I haven't got the time to do that because there's all these jobs. It's like, it's hard enough to get a job, let alone the wrong job. The job you will get is the job you are fully qualified for. That's where you've got to spend your time every single day and do the best possible job you can.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that, the people just putting NA, because I did a recording start of this week and guest was saying, great, the candidates that had applied would have got interviewed. They genuinely looked pretty good, but because there was just no effort on that original form and the volume of inbound applicants was pretty high, they were just automatically disqualifying themselves. It sounds like you're coming across a similar thing.
I try and give as accurate a piece of feedback as possible. So those folks actually get an email from me if it's a role for me, saying, you did not put the effort into your applications. And I had one person come back to me and said, I'm being rejected because I failed the quiz. I'm like, no, I'm rejecting you because this is what you wrote in the quiz. Oh, I'd have rejected myself as well. Was the response?
Well, at least they were honest.
Things like this podcast, those messages, I'm trying to get the message out to the world to mitigate mass disappointment. Folks who are unhappy they're not getting roles. And here's the reason why, whereas the competition are putting in that effort. It's at natural tension, and it's very deliberate from companies at the moment. It's very much the employer's market still.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think as well, Jim, on the market side, because I'm still seeing like loads of companies hiring. I've seen different posts you've put out fairly recently when you've been hiring. And I see a lot of companies where not only are they hiring, they are actually hiring a lot of internal talent acquisition folks as well, which says to me they really are gearing up for a lot of hiring. So the long-winded way of saying there's a lot of hiring going on out there still, but there's a huge amount of people on the market as well. So the stuff you're saying is more applicable, arguably, than it's ever been.
There's a real imbalance at the moment. I'm getting calls, for whatever reason, people have decided that I know people in the market. I have a strong network. So I get called every single day asking me for referrals, for talent leaders, for sources, for recruiters who will go into the office in the Bay Area because there's no one left. Because everybody had to move from this incredibly expensive part of the world because they were all rolled off. So there's a dearth of talent there, and these companies are choosing to be office-based, hybrid or full-on, and they can't hire folks. But then every single remote role that we post, we get best part of 1,000 applications in the 4 or 5 days that we have the job open. It's a real imbalance in the world right now.
Yeah, everything I'm getting, Jim, is like there's just something obscure about it. Like it's a security engineer, but they've got to speak multiple different languages so that they're passing it to me. Or it's like a really niche, like smart contract hacker where you just can't fill it off for a job. But it's such a niche skill set. So yeah, it's definitely, like I say, it's always cyclical, and I'm sure it will tip back a bit more towards the candidate's favour eventually. But yeah, it's a far cry from 2021 and 22, mate, isn't it?
But then companies were making massive mistakes back then. They were over-hiring because they weren't planning effectively. It's one of the things that we've been very intentional about the build out of Ashby, that we anchor the growth that we have on the business, the results that we've achieved. Whereas back in 2021, most companies were looking at some kind of future goal and then building the entirety of their company towards that goal. Whereas you only actually need to build your sales force towards that goal. And then everybody else is built off of the revenue that's generated by that sales organization. So that's one of the big changes we've made here. And we've had 4x of people growth since I joined 2.5 years ago, but far greater than that in revenue growth.
Yeah.
So that intentionality is serving us very well. But back then it's almost like the red mist fell and everybody was just on this scramble for talent.
Yeah.
At least they could hire them in the future. We learned a lot from the mistakes back then as well.
Yeah, no, you're right. And there definitely needed to be a bit more sobriety, because you're right. At one point, if you were able to raise and your revenue was going in the right direction, like for that moment in time, for whatever reason, profit just seemed to be so far down the priority list. And obviously that's just not sustainable. The money's got to come from somewhere.
That's why we're seeing these really difficult to fill roles now, because people are so conservative on headcount. They're trying to pack 2 or 3 other people into one head. That's and again, this is cyclical. We saw it in 2001 and 2002. We saw it in 2009 and 2010. It happens all the time when cash is tight. And then it becomes a fascinating thing. Do you actually really want 3 people in one who are probably mediocre because they can't be experts in all of those things? You want someone really smart and spiky in one of those areas who can cross-train.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing. I've said this before on another pod, but CIO and CISO roles, I'm seeing that merged into one. I've had specs changed on me halfway through a search where they're sometimes putting, let's say, 3 people into one role and paying a little bit more money, but they're not paying 3 times the amount, but then that would defeat the object. But yeah, no, definitely trying to get a bit more bang for the buck, I think, at the minute, employers.
Because of AI coming in, it's like this now IT and people are the same function. A good friend of mine is like, he's been in that kind of role for 3 or 4 years. They just actually became an Ashby customer. So that's a fantastic story of how he's crossed over from the technical space into leading a people function. The concept of chief people officers but also leading the IT function or vice versa, because of the AI component of the planning and the build out of a company, that's going to be a really interesting evolution.
Yeah, it is, mate. Jim, just go back to what you said about doing things properly. I think that really compounds over time. If you get a reputation for doing things properly, when Jim Miller hits my inbox, I'm reading the message because I know that he's not faffing around, he's doing things properly. And it ties back into something else you said as well. You were talking about people reaching out and you said the words not using AI. And I think there's a bit at the minute where people are probably overusing it. It ties back into just doing things properly. I feel like there's a bit of a resurgence of people wanting to, not anti-AI, but certain people are overusing it and it's dehumanizing things a bit. We're all on the lookout for it. Like in our inboxes, I looked down at my phone when I was walking back to record this and I got an email of someone I didn't recognize. I could just tell the first 2 lines it was AI. Didn't even open it.
I think it's, by all means, use the tool. I'm old enough to remember when we were allowed to start using a calculator in maths tests, because they were becoming ubiquitous. Casio had bought out the watch, so at that point, we just got to let it, I think, in the day. Now I'm really dating myself. But use the tools, but you, the human, has to do the quality control on the output. We had an interesting interview, like a challenge round, a writing exercise for a recruiter role. And the question was, how would you judge the taste of a software engineer who can design? So again, this is a role that is, in theory, 2 different jobs in one, but we hire very aesthetically minded software engineers for a particular role within our org. And you had people answering this with, I judge their implementation of color theory. I'm like, but what qualifies you, a recruiter, to be able to judge color theory? So that became my question when I was doing the follow-up interview. One person was like, well, actually, I'm a creative director in an artistic ad agency before. So this, I was like, great, you're in.
Yeah,
next.
Great answer.
So like, you wrote it here as, and it's okay, so that's ChatGPT slot. You've now let yourself down because you're claiming to be able to do something that, yes, it's a perfectly correct answer that the AI has given you, but it doesn't reflect well on your integrity. That is the answer that you chose to deliver. I'd far rather you just turn around and went, to be honest, I'm not qualified to do that. But if they've really formatted their CV nicely, then that's a great indicator of their taste.
Yeah.
Overcomplicated it because AI has seduced you into that.
Yeah. Some of it, Jimmy, I'm sure you still do now, and I'm sure you were saying it 5, 10, 15 years ago. But if it's on your resume or if you put it on the form, expect it to be asked and expect to be able to give a pretty definitive, pretty conclusive answer about it. We see candidates do it all the time where they put stuff on the resume and the minute you start digging, it's just not there. The AI is probably exaggerating this sort of stuff more.
I think so.
Yeah. Cool. Do you have anything else for folks on the market? So let's say, I know you're doing a lot of hiring yourself. You've obviously done a lot of hiring, fairly unique perspective, because you've done a lot of hiring agency side and you've done a lot of hiring internal as well. And you've seen various different markets, good and bad. Anything else that folks should be doing? I know you've given us a fair bit on this already, but if there's anything else, it would be nice.
Just writing the resume, writing your CV. You used to be able to get a job with a list of what you've done in your career. Then you needed to write what you've done and how you did it. Now you need to write what you've done, how you did it, and what the impact was. And not only the impact, but also the magnitude. So if your CV says, I'm a recruiter, I sourced 500 candidates and filled 50 jobs. Great. That's kind of table stakes of something that you'd expect somebody to write if they've been at a company for a year or two. What was the impact of your hires? How were your hires judged in terms of quality? Go deeper into, by the way, that's me sourcing 5 times more than anyone else in the company did. And I did it across these roles, which were the most difficult to fill, which is why I was deploying sourcing as a tactic on those positions rather than filling them from inbound. And by the way, I also filled 200 other roles, but those through inbound and internal mobility and employer referrals. So this 50 was just me going and sourcing, and there's 50 people that wouldn't be at the company. And those 50 people led to this and this product being built. And here's the revenue that came into that company. You're writing like a business owner, even though it's not your business, you're just a contributor to it. You're talking about the downstream impact of the work you did. Now, there's no data that's confidential within that or anything else. You can hand wave at it and you can talk about it with authority. But now you're talking about somebody that's truly connecting their work with the company that they work for and the outcomes that have been achieved. That's what you need to have on your CV now to compete with everyone else, because that's what the people who are getting hired are writing. So that's my one piece of advice. It's getting to the impact, the magnitude. Don't just write a percentage. 10% of a pound is 10p. 10% of 10 million pounds is £1 million. There's a big difference. Hide behind percentages. The hiring managers will see the difference when you talk about the magnitude and talk about the impact.
I really like that. So what you did, how you did it, the impact it had, and the magnitude of the impact. I think it's great for people applying for jobs. When you were just talking there, I was actually visualizing myself in a client meeting and telling clients different scenarios about when we and I have done pretty well. And I was like, yeah, I should do that more when I'm pitching new clients. So this could be for getting a job. This could be for onboarding new logos as a salesperson. This could be if you're head of pen testing and you've got a new client. You can relate that kind of 4-point methodology you've just laid out. That could help in a lot of scenarios.
Credit to Laszlo Bock, who's the former chief people officer at Google, by the way, because he wrote the formula. Achieved X as by Y by doing Z. A LinkedIn post in 2013, I think. So that's really the inspiration for that. And then the other thing is, there's no such thing as beating the ATS. Don't go and spend your money with these people who tell you they can rewrite your resume, AI proof them and everything else. We are one of the only ATSs who's got the capability to use AI, but it's objective resume review of the criteria that the human writes that they would normally have in their head when they're reviewing the resume. So it's akin to the minimum requirements of the job as written in the job description.
Okay.
So it's all evidence-based. If you haven't read the job description and made sure you've got the evidence in your CV to meet the requirements, you will get rejected by the human or by the technology. So almost build out a library of these bullet points that you can drag and drop into your skeleton CV that relate directly to the criteria of the job description. And again, it's that due diligence. It's a full-time job to find a job. You've got to read the whole job description. Don't just apply based on the job title.
Yes, and basics, Jim. Ashby's got the tech there to force you to slow down, to speed up, to actually do it properly for the employer's benefit and ultimately for the candidate's benefit as well.
Yeah. Internal, say I need an account executive who's done B2B SaaS sales. I would write that criteria in the ATS for that job. And then every single CV that comes in would be assessed by the AI against that single criteria and every other criteria uniquely. And it doesn't score or stack rank or say hire this person. It just shows you, recruiter, where the evidence is of the candidate meeting that criteria. So for example, B2B SaaS, it will actually go off and understand which of the companies on a CV are SaaS companies, B2B SaaS companies. So instead of you, the recruiter, going to Crunchbase or LinkedIn to find that information, it's already there showing you the evidence. So if someone's worked for Slack for 10 years, it will say, They've got 10 years of experience working as an account executive at Slack. Slack is a B2B SaaS company. So now you see that, it points you to the evidence. You can confirm that they meet the criteria. Then you go to the next criteria, then the next criteria. Tick, tick, these are my minimum qualifications. This person's qualified, move forward. That's 2-3 seconds worth of time on a screen for that application. It's time saving. There's no selection, no stack ranking, no scoring, no, this is the person you should hire for this job based on the paper resume. It's all the same thing that would have been in the recruiter's head. It's just saving them time because it's driving directly to the evidence in the resume.
Yeah, cool. So you're still seeing every application.
Yeah, the human has to press the button, the human has to validate, and all of the citations, all of the evidence are present. So it's all completely transparent, it's auditable, and it's compliant with all the various legislations.
Yeah, cool. So you can probably have a bit more of a leaner, lesser amount of recruiters on your team to get more work done, probably.
My personal record is just over 1,500 resumes reviewed in a day while doing my day job. When I led that Google, their weekly target was 2,500. So I don't do that very often, but I do get to test the functionality. I have a stopwatch on my desk and I'm testing everything. I'm giving feedback on, hey, the thing that's slowing me down was our latency to serve the next CV. And we shaved some time. So then the engineers went off and built parallel processing.
Oh, wow.
A couple of seconds down to a tenth of how much that saved me in a day. So yeah, all of that kind of thing. It's all about efficiency gains.
So yeah, 1,500 resumes in a day. How many coffees was that there, mate?
I only have one.
Okay.
It's a very large one that stays warm all the time.
See, that one there is probably about 3 or 4 of mine. So yeah, we're probably about even.
It's actually yours gold.
Very good, yeah. You still maintain some of your Britishness, even though you've been over the US for a while.
On a Saturday morning in the game, and one of the kids knocked my tea off the bench, and I was like, don't spill my tea, we don't need a revolution. And all Americans just looked at me and started cracking up. They thought I was Australian.
Oh, I get that when I was on holiday in the US. I was getting that all the time. Like people genuinely, which part of Australia you were from, I was getting that frequently. Yeah, I don't know what it is, mate. The accent must sound different to other people than it does to us.
Too much neighbours and home and away as a kid, that's the trouble.
So, Tim, we talked a lot about the market, different things in your career, anything you've done to handle tough times or setbacks. You touched on it earlier, like when you talked about not putting your hand up and you thought you were going to get that promotion. So it sounds like you've reacted pretty well and gone, what can I learn from this? Bang, and then move forward. So that was probably a good example. But anything else you've done to overcome tough times? I'm sure it hasn't all been plain sailing, mate.
No, not at all. You have to be prepared to do the work, but also to flex your style. So when I joined Ashby, I was employee 60. Small company, no one else doing any TA work. We have operating principles rather than values. Like it's an external post says, values end up being things like work hard and be nice to people. Whereas our operating principles include operating principle number 5, which is we hire frustratingly patiently, which to me is a mandate for quality. So it immediately worked with me as an individual. But this is spring 2023, the depths of the downturn. And I'm coming into a company, even with all the experience and everything I had, and I'm basically an IC recruiter again, as well as having a fancy job title and having to do a whole bunch of other like 0 to 1 bill type work. And I'm in there screening resumes and I'm interviewing 16 people a day and building a company whilst building the process. It's about looking at the situation and designing something that fits the company as to where they are in that moment, not just applying what you've always done. I couldn't apply Google's mass model of hiring software engineers to a company of Ashby's size. We've actually got a podcast called Offer Accepted, and episode 42 is Anna and my team. You can find it on our website talking about our process. And I used time postings. So we only post a job for a specific number of days, which our data tells us is the amount of time we need to post it for to get 2 or 3 candidates who are above the bar at the end of the process. And then sourcing and referrals add the cream to the top of that model. But that's probably effective for my time at that particular time. And then we've continued it for our non-evergreen roles. But we have sourcing in the mix there. And then the first hire I made was a sourcer to do proactive sourcing behind the scenes so every job would open. And we've got a short list for each role of source candidates. When I joined FullStory in the height of 2021, spring 21, completely different global environment, the first thing I did was flip the bit and go away from sourcing when everybody else was hiring sources as fast as they could get them. And we moved to an inbound first model because the sources of all these other companies were triggering people to look around, get their heads up and start looking at work. And then they were being picked up by our job postings, which were incredibly discoverable and were being pushed by LinkedIn into their emails, not into their in-mail inboxes. So neither of those are particularly stories about the bad times, but it's the conversation, the message really is about being willing to flex, to assess the situation, identify what the biggest impact you can have in the moment is, doing things right, acting like you're running a business. And that's the key piece, having that mindset that you are going to operate differently, and then understanding when things change and when you have to pivot again. And that's likely in the same job. Because if you don't, you're not going to be in that role for very much longer, because the company's beyond you or the economy is.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I just feel like change is happening so quick. I think that thing about being adaptable and what you've described there is just so important. If you have this, James Caan, he's called Shark Tank in the US, it's called Dragon's Den in the
Remember
UK. But yeah, James Caan, he started a couple of recruitment companies and he was on Dragon's Den. And he used to say what you just said there, observe the masses and do the opposite, which is exactly what you've done. Like, you've looked at the data, really slowed down to speed up, step back and massively observed the masses and done the opposite. And it sounds like it was a pretty intelligent move.
It was a shock to folks. I was like, no, trust me on this. I've got the data from my past life to back up this decision. We saw it at Google, that when Google's sources turned a candidate, a passive person who wasn't looking for work, into an active applicant for Google, the first thing that person did was go and apply to a whole bunch of other jobs. We used to talk to the candidates about that behavior, gather that information and report back on it. You think about what's happening there. You've just turned somebody who was completely happy in their job, but Google came calling, that brand name. You're now interested, but you know in your head, if I'm going to get the most out of Google, I need to have competing offers. That was the engineers. So folks naturally went out and started to look at other jobs. They wanted to do that almost as a form of research. Is the comp right? Is there anything else that's more interesting out there? And so we're triggering that and creating that. So I developed a model that riffed off of that and gained the advantage off of everybody else hiring tons and tons of sources to try and activate the world. It was the Great Resignation was the thing that was happening. Right? Well, everyone's going to resign. They're going to want their pick of jobs. So let's really double down on the advertising side of things. I don't know, our engineering hiring went from the low double digits of percentage from inbound up to the 70% mark.
Wow.
Inbound.
Yeah, good. That sounds good. You picked some great companies. So, Jim, you know, when you joined Google, so like, what kind of stage was Google at when you joined them?
8,000 people.
Okay.
Some engineers in Dublin, some engineers in Zurich, no one really in London. And I think they had Tokyo, Seoul. They didn't own YouTube when I joined. So it was Google.
Okay. Yeah.
Remember my first hire. And you used to have to get your offer packet. Everyone thinks, oh, Google Behemoth, how can you possibly adapt from Google down to a startup? My first offer, I had to get the offer packet into the cart to be pushed into Larry Page's office for him and the leadership team to read it and basically with a red pen decide whether or not this person's been. And if you'd made a typo, you, the recruiter, in your write-up, then the candidate didn't get hired. My God. You had multiple levels of auditors who would audit everything to make sure that there were no typos from the recruiters. Anyway, how do I get my physical offer packet from London for the first hire for this particular team I'm working on into this cart? So I call the recruiter for the equivalent team in Mountain View, said, hey, could you print out my offer packet, put it in the cart, please? Sure, no problems at all. Her boss says, oh, I didn't know you had a offer going in this week. She said, oh, I haven't. This is for Jim in London. Next thing I know, my boss is getting a call from someone who's really angry that I'm asking their team member to do my admin for me. He just gives me the phone and says, here you go. And I'm like, huh, what? And this person's screaming down the phone at me because I've asked someone to print out an offer packet. And I was like, well, who are you? I think you're the person who should have made the process or designed the process to enable this to happen because you're the point person for the team. These are the problems that we were solving for back then because it was international expansion. It was a change from the US-centered model that the company had, and things get done differently, and you have the Atlantic in the way and so on. So there's a lot of future-proofing, a lot of that kind of work. So you just build a full ton of new skills when you're involved in a situation like that.
Yeah, I bet you do. Yeah, getting Google at that phase of its life cycle. You seem to have a knack, mate, for picking companies when they're on a nice trajectory.
The advice I give to anyone right now is the product has to have product market fit. If you don't understand the return on investment that a purchasing company would get from a product, then you should think twice about joining, because anything else is a strategy of hope. And you get companies that create a market. So it's natural to go, but look, Slack, the thing didn't exist beforehand, and then they've created this massive company, and then it gets bought and so on, and it's a success story. No, product market fit was there. It's a communications, and company communications are key, and it's an improvement, a riff off the same concept. For me, going to Ashby, an ATS, pretty much every company spends some money on software to support hiring, even if it's only the wages of the people who are having to work off the spreadsheets that they're using. But then you start to get into concepts like total addressable market and things like that. And you're like, okay, I can see the value of this company. And there are sadly a lot of software companies out there that are building products that can't tell that story of ROI. So that's one piece of advice. Now, obviously, it's a tough market, so you don't necessarily get that choice. But if you do have a choice, that's the pathway I'd go to.
Yeah. Do you know as well, what I would say as well, Jim, is like, you definitely live and breathe those values, because I remember when we first spoke, I've used Ashby, by the way, because some of my clients were, so I do know it's good, but I remember when I spoke to you and I was like, this guy really believes. I could tell you believed in the product. And you can just tell when someone's speaking, you're like, yeah, this is real. Like, and I could sense that for you the first time we spoke.
I pitched myself in the February of 23, but in September 22, I just did my due diligence to look at what the best ATS product was on the market. Okay. I was on the day one design team with GHire, Google's in-house ATS, whiteboard marker pen in hand, 60 engineers on the other side of the table, designing an ATS from scratch in 30 days. This is the space I know and love. This is very much my dream job, however sad that might sound. It's my diligence. I knew this was the best product. So if I'm going to go and pitch myself for anything, that's the first call I'm going to make. And I did. And thankfully it was received well.
Good. I'm going to send you a podcast when we get off this recording, Jim. It's basically all about, you can't say anything without saying the words AI these days. It sounds a bit cliche, but it's all about AI and just everything that's happening in the landscape for both agency side and internal, and how tech's going to affect it and where it's going. I'll send you it on LinkedIn as soon as we finish, because you'll like it. But yeah, sat across the table from 60 engineers. I bet that was like, whoa.
Got the tap on the shoulder on the Thursday night. I was in Poland. Can you be in New York on Monday morning? We're going to design a ATS for actually 30 days because the old one's just about to fall over because it had a millennium bug type thing. I'm like, yeah, sure. There. Like 5 of us on one side of the table, we all look at each other. It's like, all right, I'll pick up the whiteboard. This is what I think it is. Focus on the user. Everything else follows. Who's the user? The engineer's like, you're the recruiter. I'm like, no, the candidate's the user. So we designed the ATS to focus on the candidate and everything else being an attribute of the candidate and so on. And then they're like, how long are you here for? I said, I'm supposed to go home on Thursday. They're like, can you stay longer? I got home 7 weeks later. Only 4 days.
I tell you what though, Matt, I bet you had a scream. I bet you had a great time, didn't you?
But it's the exposure to the people that were in the room who I wouldn't have got exposure to. Yep. So then those later requests are landing on people who already know me, know how I think and so on. So yeah, it's an incredible opportunity to be involved in something like that.
I think
Very
so.
humble.
Yeah, I think so. I think the fun of it, I think the relationships you build, I think the learnings that you would have been making, then probably sometimes, yes, you would have realised, but sometimes you probably wouldn't even realise just how much you were learning doing something like that as well. So, yeah. Cool, wicked. What's the thing as well, that if you got the offer wrong, like that would just, because I'm one of those people, I can read a LinkedIn post back like 3 times, then post it and look and go, and I would have still made a mistake. So I would just be like, if me and you were working together, Jim, I'd be asking you to read everything of mine.
I have a really good friend who is my proofreader. He's a fellow recruiter, but he's a Norwich fan. So he likes nothing more than to be mean to me. So he gets to read everything that I'm ever doing external, and he's very good at that. But my boss at the time, Ian, he'd basically charge me a pint for every mistake, every single mistake I made. He'd charge me a pint. So he did very well out of my inability to be accurate in my writing, and I learned a lot. And that was just one stage of 3 steps of audit to make sure that these things were completely polished. Yeah. Now, AI would do all of the feedback summary for it. Absolutely perfect.
Yeah, cool. And if you're in New York and it's costing you a pint for every mistake, it can get quite expensive quite quickly.
This was London in the 2000s and back then.
Cool. All right, Jim. So just before I jump onto that, so your podcast called Offer Accept.
I'll send you the link of that one in particular. But there's some
Okay.
really interesting ones on there from all sorts of different talent leaders. I think Jeff Moore from Toast has just done the most recent one, a guy who I worked with for 12 years at Google. Our founders have got pods on there. Adam Horn, who leads the Open Org. So all about transparency in job descriptions. And if you've ever read our job descriptions, you'll see the influence there. We even have why you shouldn't apply on our job descriptions, for example. So yeah, lots of inspiration for people in the TA space off the back of that. We're pushing the episodes.
I like that as well, what you said about hire frustratingly
Patient.
Yeah, because it's true. Like, I think about some of the logos I hire for in the security space are like some of the most well known, and it's like they're completely like that, like they're standard, and there is just zero compromise. Like, even if it's Tom, come on, we've got to get this filled, like X, Y, and Z type thing. It's still not compromise. Like, the person has to be like grade A, good.
And it's the way it should be. That's why we're being paid to do our job. Otherwise, the hiring would do it themselves.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right, mate. We wouldn't exist if it was easy. So yeah, cool. The last question I'm going to ask you, my friend, which book has basically made you the best version of yourself? It could be book, it could be podcast, it could be like something you read online, but anything that you've consumed, mate, that's made you the best version of yourself that could help the listeners.
I think it's listening to the people that you work around. And that's very difficult these days because you're, with the remote nature of work and so on, you have to spend the time with your peers who are doing things and thinking differently. And you have to give space to listen to them, to understand what's going on. My biggest learnings in the last 3 months have been from Slack channels about customer use cases or our technology. And then I'm thinking, oh, I could apply that use case, use it here, do it differently. This would then influence how we hire, and then influences the change in the product plan for what we're going to develop and new functionality and so on. It's not so much the talking heads or the books, but it's actually the down-to-earth people that you work with day to day who've all got lessons to teach and really rich things. You've got to be able to listen. You've got to be able to comprehend that. And you've got to be personable enough to create that space and opportunity, but take some time each week to go and meet the people who do the same job as you and understand their challenges, learn from them.
Good answer, mate. That's a unique answer to that question, but it's a good one.
Never found a recruiting book that I loved because I find they're all written with founders as the audience.
Okay.
And I don't necessarily agree with the message that they're trying to deliver. Like Who, for example, really focuses on employer referrals as the be-all and end-all about building a company. I'm like, I don't think that actually fits the...
No, yeah. It's like,
that you want to be able to build for a company. Yeah, there's gaps in most of those.
Cool, mate. No, thanks, mate. It's been really nice chatting. Thanks, Jim. It's been nice chatting as always, mate, and it's flown by. And I've enjoyed it, mate. I've learned some things as well, and it's been interesting.